You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Rockies. This is Sarah Jane Maroney, your host, and welcome to this week's interview with Glant Havenar, the mayor of Palmer Lake. Glant became a resident of Palmer Lake in 2003. She has served 2 terms as a trustee and is currently serving her 2nd term as mayor. Glant also serves on the board of directors for the Pike Peak Area Council of Government and the El Paso County Board of Health. She's very involved in planning community events, including the annual Palmer Lake Wine Festival. Glant is a real estate broker by profession and brings significant knowledge to each elected position in the realm of land use, property valuation, building code, and contract experience. Glant's 3 greatest treasures call her mom, a role that has formed her core values and the heart of who she is. Palmer Lake is the only place that Glant and her family have chosen to call home. She states, "We feel very close to this town and to the many friends we have met throughout the years. This is where we will retire, a place I long to enjoy with my future grandchildren." End quote. We welcome her. Glant, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah. I am glad to be here. I'm glad to be having this conversation with you.
So tell me a little bit of background. Are you from Colorado?
I'm not from Colorado. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area and grew up in the Bay Area. And my family and I moved to Colorado. We have been in Colorado about 23 years. And it's kind of interesting, actually. We were looking for a place to call home. And we had originally settled in the Boulder area and knew it wasn't quite for us. And I was driving with my 2 oldest. My youngest son wasn't born yet. And we happened upon Palmer Lake. And we happened upon the Rock House ice cream shop. And in pulling in front of the ice cream shop, I had never seen anything that looked so Norman Rockwell and so idyllic. And we looked around and kids were doing this, meaning honk your horn when you drive by. And my daughter and I looked at each other, and she was 5 at the time and just said, this would be a great place to live. And we drove around and we found the first house that was for sale and called my husband and said, this is where we're going to settle. And we put an offer on a house. And we've been in Palmer Lake now for about 23 years.
Wow. Wonderful. Well, so how long have you been mayor? And what actually, in terms of a political career, what led you to this?
I hardly think of my career as a political career. I have always been a helper, and I have always been that mom that works in the classroom. I have always been that mom that organizes events, and I'm good at organizing things, and I always take the lead on projects. So I originally got involved in our town council really to make a difference and preserve our traditions. And I served 2 full terms on town council. So I served on town council about 8 years. Most of my children's growing up life, my oldest child is 30 and my youngest child is 18. And my children don't know any difference of mom being involved. I did 2 terms on council and I had termed out of council. I had already served my 2 full terms and thought, well, what next? I still had more to give. And I really loved the anonymity of being on council, but knew that I didn't qualify for a 3rd term. So running for mayor was the next logical option. And I actually thought at the time that it would be no different than being on town council, and that I could just continue to work on my passion projects and work on things that were really important to me, and it would be the same. So I ran for a full term as mayor. So I've served the 2 on council, then a full term as mayor, and I'm on my 2nd term as mayor now.
Is there a limit on the
There is. I'm term limited. So
okay.
I will be done after this. So I don't have aspirations for any other office. And this isn't about a political career for me. This is about preserving our traditions and our way of life so that as the children that come after us take up their leadership roles, that they're able to pass on the stories and keep our community and filled and steeped in tradition.
Beautiful. Okay, so moving on to the hot topic of the day. And I guess you and I had talked a little bit off camera from a perspective of someone who doesn't necessarily live in Palmer Lake, but who reads the news. I would think that, oh my gosh, a Buc-ee's will be there tomorrow. And that's not at all what is the case. Can you take me through some of the processes? And I also saw that, a meeting was held, and I can't remember, I think it was flagpole annexation, and I'll confess totally. I had to actually look that up. I was like, oh, okay. As I'm learning, as I go along, what does that mean, right? So, and there was all these people there, and I thought, I did think, okay, that doesn't seem like the way that the process is. So can you just talk us through, as mayor, tell us how this works, like at what stage each thing happens, if it were to be passed, if not, and take us through that, please.
So statutorily in Colorado, if you, Sarah, want to annex in Sarah's Candy Shop tomorrow, you would choose your spot up by the freeway, and Sarah's Candy Shop would fill out an application, and you would come to the town and say, I think I'd like to annex into Palmer Lake. Statutorily, we have an obligation to take you through an eligibility hearing to see if you qualify to put Sarah's Candy Shop up on the freeway. So there is statutory processes that need to be followed. And the meeting that took place on December 12th, that is going to be taking place on May 29th, has nothing to do with full annexation. It has to do with whether statutorily have they met the agreement to continue in the process. It is strictly eligibility. It has nothing to do with annexation. It is strictly, are they eligible to continue in this process? And that is something that's afforded by the Colorado Constitution, and everybody has that opportunity. Just because a trustee member says, yes, they're eligible for annexation, doesn't mean that they're for the full annexation. It means that they're allowing this process to continue, and they're allowing the applicant to continue exploring the process. We're at the very beginning stages. One of the things I'd really like to point out is most of what we are reading on the internet is not true and is simply typical citizens not understanding how the process works and what we're required to do statutorily to uphold the level of professionalism and service that they deserve, and for us to do our due diligence. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I was just kind of in my mind that this is about why Engage the Rockies exists. We want to help citizens get involved and get an understanding of the process. And as I said, I saw that lots and lots of residents had attended this. Oftentimes, we don't know the procedure. So we appreciate you taking us through that.
I think first and foremost, as a mother, as a mayor, as a business professional, I have a responsibility to the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of Colorado, and statutorily the laws as they're upheld. And that's the number one, I think, display or responsibility that we have for our children, is to follow that rule of law and to follow the Constitution and to teach our children that the founding fathers that came before us set a precedence and example that we need to follow in order to pass that down to the next generation. So following the statutes and giving them their due process is really important to me. It doesn't mean I'm for or against Buc-ee's. It means I believe in following the letter of the law, and it means that I believe in the Constitution and following the process.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. So the next thing that happens is the 29th of May. There is another meeting, and this is about whether, sorry. Okay. Let me learn here. Let me get it right. So this means that they have made an application, and it checks through that they have done their due diligence in terms of how they have applied. And then you, as the council and the mayor would say, yes, you have applied correctly, or no, you haven't applied correctly.
Correct. And then as we proceed through what's called an executive session, there's two types of sessions when you are holding your town council meetings. There are open sessions, and then there are things that are sensitive in nature that having to do with personnel or having to do with financial negotiations that take place in what's called executive session. And that is for the protection of the applicant, for their rights, for the person that's being brought into executive session. And when you're in executive session and you discuss negotiating terms or personnel matters or things like that, you may not take action in executive session. So once you go through this process of executive session, you do need to come out of executive session into the public domain and have the conversation again. And so I believe those are the things that will be going forward. We have had several executive sessions about Buc-ee's, and I can absolutely understand how the public posts things or says things about the water study or the financial study or the fiscal study, you make an agreement to not discuss the things that come out of executive session in public until they become of the public domain. So there's a lot of things that you read that are just frankly incorrect, that are things that as we're going forward, what I would really encourage people to do is instead of listening to the things that they see or read on the internet, have you ever heard of the illusory effect? That the more things you read on the internet, it makes them true. And that a lot of people get their news off the internet. Really, pick up the phone and call one of us. All of our phone numbers are public. I speak with citizens every day. I'm happy to meet with anyone and talk with any citizen, but we're just not there yet. The fact that outside interest groups are coming in and filing recall petitions on trustees for the way that they voted in a statutory hearing is absolutely unacceptable. They have not voted on annexation, and I could not tell you today, Sarah, where each trustee lies in the process. It's not something that we discuss. It's not something that's appropriate for us to discuss. And we're all going through these studies and going through the process and doing our due diligence as best we can.
So that relates to, is it sunshine laws? So, or open meeting records and things like this. So again, as you pointed out, in executive session, you're allowed to discuss things, but you're not necessarily allowed to vote or have decisions made in those executive sessions, but it gives you the wherewithal to have those conversations.
It does, but it does need to come into the public and have that conversation. But when you're dealing with leases or purchases or things of the financial nature, it's very typical in Colorado and appropriate that those conversations would happen in executive session, and then they would come out of executive session to be voted on. But it protects the applicant and protects their privacy laws.
So in terms of the studies and things, from again, my best internet understanding, there were studies that Palmer Lake undertook versus studies that Buc-ee's did. Is there a difference in that?
There is a difference, but as you know, in Colorado, typically most towns believe, as Palmer Lake believes, that any development pays their own way. And in order to statutorily go through that process, we will absolutely honor the statutes and go through that process, but we don't choose to take on the financial obligation of that. As a small town, we operate on a much smaller budget, and that's not money that we have to spend. So yes, we chose who would perform the studies. However, we have a remuneration agreement with Buc-ee's that any due process that we need to do in the form of studies or things that need to come out for us to make our best decision will be reimbursed by Buc-ee's. So Buc-ee's did not choose who performed the studies, but they will ultimately pay for those studies.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so then therefore it is worth Palmer Lake's quote unquote investment that isn't an investment to do these studies, and then the remuneration will come from the applicant, whether it's Buc-ee's.
And it's really interesting to me because I feel like this board is doing the right thing. Rather than just say no, oh my gosh, that just sounds crazy, we can't do this, that says no. I really appreciate that this board has an open mind to do their due diligence and to explore the opportunity and to really weigh the pros and the cons and to look at that. What I have found frustrating is that the community, the greater community, not necessarily the Palmer Lake community, I feel that the Palmer Lake community overall has been very supportive of the board doing their job, but the overall greater community, under the guise of outside interest groups, has been a very attack mode over this. But I really appreciate that all of my board members have been very open to taking the time and getting it right and reading the studies and going through the process. Going through the process and exploring the due diligence is so important. Rather than just saying no from the get-go or yes from the get-go, really understanding the process and going through something like this with the process. I think statutorily, our board has really learned a great deal through these studies and asking really good questions. What I can say is we did have a public meeting regarding the studies. And as we have asked some questions of the studies in executive session, The questions are really good. I really feel that people are disseminating the studies and really asking good questions on both sides. I have received many emails from people, for lack of a better term, the opposition side to Buc-ee's, just because they've taken that stand publicly. And they have really great questions. And when I'm reading these emails and saying, oh, that's a really good question, then I'll jot that question to my list as well. We can't possibly have too much information. And just because there's a remuneration agreement that Buc-ee's will pay the fees on these studies doesn't mean that they hired the people to do the studies. There's just a lot of misinformation out there that truly pick up the phone and call me. I'll take your call. I don't screen calls. I'll take your call any day.
That's awesome. So we actually interviewed Brian Risley. You can check that out on Engage the Rockies. And he spoke a lot about how people's perception of what it's like to be, in this particular case, in his case, on City Council for Colorado Springs, but it would apply to Palmer Lake as well, that it was a very, very different role than most people's preconceived notions of voting on whatever particular issue that you have, that it has a lot more to do with what you're speaking of, the statutory precedents and how to go through these procedures. You mentioned this, and I'll press a little. Could Palmer Lake have just said, no, we don't want to do this right off the get-go without even entertaining that?
Not to the eligibility hearing, we couldn't. The eligibility component, no, because statutorily they have a right to be heard whether they're eligible or not. It's interesting that Brian said that to you, because I always envisioned, as moms do, we go into problem solving mode, that you get on city council and you're going to change the world and you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And then CIRSA sits you down and CML sits you down and they explain the rules. And then you learn about CIRSA and insurability. And then you learn about Colorado Municipal League. And then you learn about the statutes. And as a statutory town, what the state dictates versus home rule. And then you learn about what you can and cannot do and the processes. And when people say that government processes take longer than doing things in the private sector, it's absolutely correct. There's a lot of things that perhaps I would want to do, or I would want to charge ahead and just, as moms, we can rule the world and fix something in 24 hours. That doesn't work that way in a government setting. And there is many more steps and many more processes. And I think that's important to know, that when the public is using their fingers to type on the internet and the keyboard courage is coming out, that they don't realize statutorily we have rules and it's very dictated, the processes to follow and what we can and cannot do. We can't do half the things they're saying we're doing. It's just not possible. Everything is taped. Sunshine laws are in effect. It's I've read on the internet that I've read that I'm taking kickbacks and I'm the realtor for Buc-ee's. These things are just not even possible. It's not even something that is in the scope of reality or in the scope of capability or that anyone would do. They don't realize how the process works. There isn't a time that we don't have a meeting that we don't have a town attorney present and the town manager present. And when we ask a question, could we do this or could we do that, that we don't have a lengthy legal answer as to ascertain why or why not we can do something. So it's a volunteer position. It is many, many hours a week. I devote more time to this than I do to my paying job. And it is something that we do because we love our community. And it absolutely breaks my heart that the greater community is not allowing these trustees to disseminate the information and do their due diligence and come to a proper decision and an answer. They're not even being given that shot. There was the recall petitions filed on those trustees immediately, with posts daily saying, we're coming after you June 2nd. I don't understand why the world is in attack mode. It is leading a town is nonpartisan. Leading a town is nonpartisan in general. Republican, Democrat, Independent shouldn't come into play.
As you have the best interests, or should at least have the best interests of Palmer Lake in mind, and that means asking appropriate questions about the process.
Right. Where I live on the mountain, I live right on the corner of Sundance Mountain. And when we light the star, it is such a privilege to look out my deck and see the star lighting and shining over Palmer Lake that every time that star is lit, I look out and I think, this is what we need to protect. This is what we need to leave to the children that come after us. One of my favorite things to do is to give the second and fourth graders that are studying Colorado history a tour of the town hall. And one of the things that we do, our town hall was built in 1914. And when we're talking about the grandmas and grandpas that came before us and our ancestors and teaching the kids about those grandmas and grandpas that came, that built Palmer Lake, that lived through the flood, that lived through the fires, and that left us for us, that how grateful I am that coming from the first mayor in 1890, that a woman could lead this town. And it's a huge blessing. And one of the last things we do in the tour, when I have the littles in there, is we reach up and we touch a fire badge that's over the fireplace, that when they built the hearth from the stones left from the Rockwood Hotel that burnt down in the 1920s, that the fire chief at the time put his badge in the stone. And I have the kids touch it and just say thank you to the grandpas that came before them, and to know. And they always ask, do you think I could be the mayor someday? And I say, yes, you can be the mayor someday, and you can lead your community, and you can raise your kids in this community. And it's such a gifting to be able to lead in this capacity and to pass that on to the children, that I can't imagine not making a proper decision for Palmer Lake and listening to all sides. And I really feel like in social media right now, these greater community citizens don't know who we are and don't know where we come from and don't know that being able to lead this community truly brings tears to my eyes, because I know the greater responsibility and what we're leaving. We've lost 3 old timers in the last month, people that have come that were here in the 60s when the flood happened and that built this community. And it's weird. I keep this by my desk all the time, so I'll show you. I have it right here. I just lost a neighbor whose wife brought the Palmer Lake poppy to Palmer Lake. And those poppies don't grow anywhere else but Palmer Lake. And if you cut them and try to put them in a vase, they don't live. They only last on the mountain landscape. And I feel so privileged that when he passed away, they left me their last jar of poppy seeds. And so I carry these around just knowing that to sprinkle them on our mountain for the kids that come. And I'm thinking of something really special to do with them. It is a privilege to live here. And what I read in social media is absolutely not indicative of who I am or who this board is and what this board is doing going forward. This board carries a huge burden with deciding what is the best for Palmer Lake. And they're doing a really good job at disseminating the information.
So talk me through that. So there on the 29th, there is another hearing.
It's for eligibility only.
Okay.
Are they eligible to proceed?
Have they filled out their paperwork correctly? And probably they have. I mean, I would just assume that's not, you go through an application, you put all your
Right.
information in, and it would be, so are they eligible? What would happen? So let's say they were, but again, most people can fill out an application. Every once in a while, you do have something where they, oh, you forgot to sign it, or you forgot to do this. And then you go through those procedures. Let's say that they did, that they are eligible. Then what happens?
Then they can proceed to the annexation process, which would involve many conversations, an executive session, which would involve conversations regarding annexation and what that would look like in terms of expectations that perhaps CDOT would have, that expectations that the county would have, expectations that even Monument would have with regard to fire. There would be many conversations that would have to ensue about what those next steps would be, who would pay for those next steps, how that would financially manifest between both parties. And then they would form what's called an annexation agreement that lists all of those things in the annexation agreement. And then the annexation would be voted on.
Okay. And how long, I mean, like, how long's a piece of string, right? But could that be months and months? Could it be done in 3 months or something?
I don't know that the timeline is as important as getting it right. And maybe it's not right. And maybe as you proceed in those financial questions and obligations of CDOT and obligations of Palmer Lake and obligations of water, maybe we arrive at the decision that it's not okay. maybe we arrive at the decision that it is okay. How long it takes isn't as important to me as getting it right. Making sure that all the questions are answered.
So if a citizen had a particular point of view, they were for it or they were against it, either way, doesn't matter. What would how are they, I mean, should they call you up and say, oh my gosh, Glenn, you have to do this, or oh my gosh, Glenn, don't do this? Like, at what point do you take into consideration the input of the citizens of Palmer Lake?
Well, I'm getting right now, just on Buc-ee's, about 20 emails a day and 3 or 4 phone calls a day. It's interesting. Right now, I'm getting phone calls about the meeting on the 29th. They'd like me to move the meeting on the 29th to a larger venue. Okay. Now, we are Palmer Lake. I can't move statutorily, I can't move an annexation meeting out of Palmer Lake. So we have very few choices as to where we could hold a meeting in Palmer Lake. In holding a meeting in a larger capacity in Palmer Lake, I also have to worry about statutory laws regarding microphones, recording the meeting, and I would have to bring in a company to do that. So is it financially possible to incur an expenditure by moving it to a larger meeting hall? We are researching that and we are looking into that. But the reason the meeting on December 12th wasn't moved is because that was the meeting where the new trustees were taking their oath of office. And just as tradition is so important to me and important to be in that town hall that every council member has come before since 1890, I really believed that they earned the right to be sworn in their own town hall. The meeting was taped. They had facilities for people to listen online, and they had the capacity to submit questions by email. And everyone was asked more than 8 times, is there anyone else that wants to come in? So open meeting laws were not broken. And open meeting laws, everybody had an opportunity to speak that wanted to speak or wanted to have input. And I do answer my emails and I do answer my phone calls. There is one in particular that's coming to mind. I'm getting quite a few emails from a gentleman that his subject matter is water. And he's been posing a lot of great questions to me. And he's asked if we could meet. I'm not opposed. I don't know everything. I can't possibly know everything. And everybody has different things that they can add of value. I would be remiss if I wasn't answering those emails or engaging in those conversations.
In terms of Palmer Lake and Buc-ee's and people's, obviously they're passionate. And that's great because they are passionate, but they can be passionate in both directions. And what would you say to a citizen who, aside from Buc-ee's, wants to get involved? Because Engage the Rockies is all about this kind of, engaging our populace in terms of civics. What would you say to someone who's watching all this, regardless of whether they're for or against Buc-ee's, in terms of the recall that's happening with the trustees and things like this? What would you say to your citizen? Like, yeah, it's still worth getting involved.
I absolutely believe it's worth getting involved. And as hard as this has been, I can't think of a place that I would rather be. I would truly ask our citizens to not get your information off the internet. Any trustee or myself will speak to you any day. The town staff will speak to you any day. We will give you the rules. We will show you where to find the statutes. We will help to have you learn and engage. We can even get you classes if you want to be learning at CML, Colorado Municipal League, to teach and train things statutorily. Those are things that I really believe in. I wouldn't encourage someone to get involved because they're for or against Buc-ee's. I would encourage them to get involved because they truly want to leave Palmer Lake. I want to leave this community a better place for having occupied it. I want people to get involved because they have that passion for Palmer Lake and they see our kids at the Yule log hunt or at the Easter egg hunt or at the Santa's breakfast. One of the things that I do that is my most treasured thing that I will always remember is I started collecting in a mailbox all the Santa letters that kids in Palmer Lake have written over the years. And I personally at Christmas time answer every one of those letters. And it's really important to me. And kids don't ask for toys in those letters. They ask for the future. They ask for things for their parents. They ask for very grown-up things. They ask to cure hunger. They ask for things that I know that we're leaving this community in the hands of a generation that will think with their hearts. And I truly believe that. And every single thing that we do is for those children that are coming after us. So if you are passionate about getting involved, I would love for you to join parks, to join economic development, to learn the things and to take these appointments as they become available. Get involved in planning commission. If you're passionate about Buc-ee's and you don't like the way that our land use code is written, join planning commission so you could be impactful in changing land use statutes. You could write the new land use code. There is a committee forming right now, that's going to work hand in hand with the planning commission to work on the future of land use and what that will look like in Palmer Lake. There's many ways you could get involved and keep your anonymity and be able to make a difference. But our number one priority is all those kids down at Palmer Lake Elementary down the street. And when they say, can I be the mayor? Can I make a difference? You absolutely can. And I think that it takes a village. We just need to give each other a little bit of grace and let us do our jobs.
That's a beautiful note to end on, Glant. Thank you so much for your time. I've really been educated about the process and appreciate your input.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.